Baldur's Gate 3. Wow, what a game. I've seen the reviews, and though I have not finished the game, I agree with pretty much most of what everyone has to say about it. But don't worry, I'm not here to be the 100th person to tell you that this game is amazing, you should play it, and you should go buy it. You probably already heard that, and you probably already know that. Instead, what I really want to do in this video is to have a discussion with you regarding some aspects of Baldur's Gate 3 that I find very interesting. But before we dive headfirst into that, I want to paint a scene for you, so bear with me. Just so we're all in the same headspace. Imagine, for a second, that you and your friends are adventurers in a strange fantasy world. You take your first steps into a dark and grungy house in search of some treasure. The house has been empty ever since goblins raided and ransacked the town years ago, and all that's left now is the smell of dust and rotting wood. As you make your way down the hallway, the stillness of the air is heavy. The floorboards creak with each step you take, and as you slowly round the corner, you see an ornate door that is surprisingly clean relative to everything around it. You reach out with your hand to open the door, but it's locked. What would you like to do? Do you try and lockpick it? Do you put down some explosives and blow the door open? Do you tell your barbarian friend to beat the door down with his warhammer? Or do you tell your druid companion to turn into an animal and go into the small hole you saw outside and hope that hole leads to the room behind the door? Or maybe you tell the wizard in your party to use magic and turn themselves into a gas so they can go into the broken plumbing and pop up on the other side of the door. There's no wrong answers here. Just choices. Choices. Choice is something that has defined video games since the very beginning. It's what sets gaming apart from other forms of media such as books, movies, television. In other forms of media, we absorb the world and story presented to us as passive spectators. When we play a video game, however, we are no longer a passive spectator, but are instead an active participant, one who is afforded the opportunity of choice. The choice to decide how to interact with the game, the story, the characters. And through our choices, the game evolves around us. Outcomes in the game become shaped by our decisions. In the beginning, the choices were relatively simple. Do we move a pixelated line up or down? Do we shoot the enemy with a shotgun or a rocket launcher? Eventually, gaming as a whole got more advanced, and with it, the choices we had to make would also expand and become more complex as well. Some games provided gamers with the tools and freedom to express their creativity, whereas other games provided players with choices that left them free to dictate the future of an entire civilization for generations. Different games offer different levels of, and different styles of, freedom and choice. And I believe it is this that is the secret sauce of Baldur's Gate 3. Yes, the art and graphics are great, music is amazing, and the voice acting is superb. But I don't believe these are the reasons why this game is so special. It's you, the player, and your choices. Larian Studios, the developers of Baldur's Gate 3, understands this in a way that I think few developers do, and trusts their players with the freedom to navigate the 3 pillars of Dungeons & Dragons in the way that best suits their playstyle. The 3 pillars being exploration, combat, and social interaction. It is for this reason I believe that this game will be remembered for years to come. The freedom that Larian Studios provides you in this game will allow you to make choices that will make you laugh, cry, cover your eyes in fear, and smile from ear to ear. But most importantly, they will be your choices, your story, your game. Let's talk about it. Exploration in Baldur's Gate 3 is really something that kind of surprised me. It starts off feeling a bit slow. There's no button to sprint from point A to point B, so it feels like it can take a while. And while that might seem like a misstep on the developer's part, it actually kind of makes sense here. You see, after an hour or so in the game, you stop noticing that you can't run because you're no longer really needing to run anywhere. In fact, you're probably stopping every few feet just to stop and interact with something in the game. Heck, half the time, you're probably looting trash off of every table and every box you see because you want to sell all the rotten tomatoes and raggedy clothes you find to the local vendor in order to get some extra coin for the sword that he's selling. Honestly, I don't think a lot of people who play this game are loot goblins that check every single box or crate in every other game they play. But I'm going to guess a lot of people will be loot goblins in this game. Why is that? Well, because the game does such a good job at rewarding your exploration that you can't help but be thorough and look through everything. I found magical items when looting a random skeleton, found high-level magical scrolls in a bookshelf in a library full of bookshelves. Everywhere you go, there is the potential for loot and treasure to be found. And that's just material goods. There's also lore in books you can find, dialogue that your party may have when walking across something they recognize, or even entire secret quests, levels, and dungeons that you can completely miss if you don't take your time to explore the world around you. This stuff is all optional, and you most likely won't see a lot of this stuff on your first pass through the area, or even your first playthrough. There's so many secrets in the world that require your active exploration, curiosity, and interaction that every little secret you find feels that much more rewarding and personal. And as the game goes on and your character's stats improve, your character will only get better at detecting some of the hidden secrets of the world passively. Your character will point out a strange floorboard that looks like it can be lifted up. They'll point out areas off the road that look like they can be dug up for treasure. They'll point out a button that's hidden on the wall. But that doesn't mean that exploration becomes easy and boring. Far from it. As you start getting familiar with the layout of the world around you, you'll also start noticing the depth of the possible exploration as well. And this will require your active participation and ingenuity to get through. From locked doors, wide chasms, and environmental puzzles, you'll constantly find obstacles to your exploration. In a lot of games, you might need a special key or a magical item to get past the environmental obstacles put forth in front of you. But in Baldur's Gate, oftentimes all you'll need is just some experimentation. Over time, you'll start realizing that you can stack boxes to get to hard-to-reach places. You'll realize that while your character might not have enough strength to jump across a wide chasm, your barbarian friend does, and he could probably toss you across like Aragorn did with Gimli in the Two Towers. The game constantly gives you opportunities to flex your imagination and find your way of getting across obstacles. Because, yes, there's multiple ways to get to these secret areas, and there are a lot of secret areas. And I think that is my favorite thing about exploration in this game. There's no right way to go about exploring the world around you. It's clear that the developers of the game created a rich world that they wanted you to explore. And because it's so dense, so creative, and so fresh, you'll often explore so much that you'll oftentimes find yourself in places or situations that your character probably shouldn't be in, which can lead us to...
Boys, make them bleed.
Combat is a big part of Baldur's Gate 3. It starts out pretty simple, and honestly, it might even look boring to those who are more used to real-time combat, but please give it a chance. You'll be surprised by how much the game really opens up after even just the first hour. Each level you earn, each piece of gear you acquire, and each spell you learn increases your power and options exponentially. What Baldur's Gate 3 gives up from being a turn-based game instead of a real-time game, you more than make up for with regards to the amount of depth afforded by the systems in the game. All of which lead to a more engaging and rewarding tactical experience. Just off the top of my head, I can think of a few reasons why combat in the game is so fun and expressive. For one, each weapon class, be it swords, spears, maces, bows, etc., each weapon class has been given so much more flavor and identity through unique weapon abilities. In typical Dungeons & Dragons, your standard non-magical weapons will only allow you to make a basic melee attack or ranged attack. But in Baldur's Gate 3, Larian Studios have added multiple weapon abilities to each standard weapon class such that even your basic sword feels like it has utility other than just dealing damage. For example, hammers can do a concussive smash to daze an enemy, swords can lacerate foes to make them bleed, and bows can use an ability to shoot the hamstring of an opponent to slow them down. And then there's the verticality, which there's a surprising amount of in this game. I make a mention of it here because while you do have verticality in standard tabletop D&D, it's much more difficult to implement verticality with pen and paper. But here in the three-dimensional world of Baldur's Gate, Larian has taken so much more time to craft combat arenas that make use of vertical space. Now, I'm not just talking about your standard hills and platforms you can go and walk up to. You'll find those plenty, but you can also teleport and jump on top of roofs, climb onto rafters, and get to other sorts of high places where you're able to take advantage of your position to tactically neutralize threats far down below. There's just so many uses of verticality in Baldur's Gate that standard D&D now feels kind of flat in comparison. Getting the high ground has just never been so fun, and it's even more fun because of our next reason, which is shoving. Shoving, man. Shoving in this game is so incredibly fun. It's something so simple and yet so satisfying. You can shove people downstairs, over ledges, over cliffs, into a lava pit, or into a giant pit of spiders. One of my favorite things to do with my bard is to play music by the edge of a cliff so that I can attract a guard, and while this guard's distracted, my barbarian friend would walk over and just push the guard over the edge, stealthily taking them out in the process. Just never gets old. And being a video game, Baldur's Gate 3 is also able to do all the math for you pretty much instantly. Combat is no longer bogged down by all the players at the table needing to roll their dice and counting their damage. You'll even have a helpful indicator telling you just how much of a chance your attack or spell has to hit an enemy. What this means is you spend less time doing mental math in your head or on paper, and instead spend more time thinking about how you best want to mess up that goblin that demanded you kiss their feet. Something else that I also really enjoyed a lot was the variety of arrow types you can find or buy in the game. From firing an arrow of ice that explodes in cold damage, to using an arrow of roaring thunder to push enemies backwards, to using the arrow of transposition to teleport to the end of the arrow's trajectory. Bow and crossbow users have gained a bunch of new abilities through the use of different arrow types, and the game gives you so many of these that you don't really feel like you need to hoard them all. And because of this, even ranged weapon users will feel like they have more options to support their team with, aside from just doing damage from a distance. And lastly, you don't even have to engage in combat most of the time, which leads me to the next and final pillar of Baldur's Gate 3. Alright, last but certainly not least, social interaction. While combat is arguably the best upgrade that Baldur's Gate 3 offers over tabletop D&D, I didn't want to discuss it as the last pillar of Baldur's Gate. And this is because I believe that the people you meet and interact with are the life and soul of the game. And Baldur's Gate knows this as well, which is why, you get the same amount of experience from talking your way out of situations as you would from duking it out in combat. And thankfully, conversing with the denizens of the world is just as exciting oftentimes as combat. From the lowliest peasant or squirrel to powers that are beyond mortal understanding, you'll find a whole range of characters to meet and befriend or make enemies of across your playthrough. And each one is voice acted. And not only are they voice acted, but they are voice acted so well that you will most likely want to listen to everything they're saying instead of just reading the subtitles really fast and skipping through the dialogue like I would in most games. Back to the squirrel. Did I mention that you can have conversations with animals? If you have the speak with animal spell or potion, you can do just that. You'll find that all the animals in the game can be just as fun to talk to as the people. Larian Studios didn't have to add the ability to speak with every bird, toad, or cow you meet, but they did. And yes, they are all voice acted just as well as their human counterparts and have their own unique personalities.
Hiss! I say hiss!
You can have full conversations with them just as much as you would with the humans. And when you get down to the actual conversations themselves, it's you, the player, who gets to drive the direction of the dialogue. In a lot of games with dialogue choice, there may be usually a few choices to choose from, usually a good option, an evil one, and maybe one or two more sprinkled in. In BG3, you'll often find yourself with 5, 6, or 7 dialogue options that cater to a whole range of different paths that you can take the conversation in. Even your race and your class will have an influence on these conversations. If you're an intelligent wizard, you'll often see a dialogue option that reflects your knowledge of arcana, whereas barbarians, they may not have that, but they will have more dialogue options that may flex their strength or intimidation skills. As a result, conversations feel so much more natural and tailor-made for your character. The game has 11 races and 12 classes to choose from, and it's amazing to me that no matter what race or class combination you pick, you'll always feel like your background is being reflected in the dialogue options presented to you. You'll find that sometimes just being a cleric or being a tiefling or something else is enough to get you through a potential sticky situation. And the best part about all this is that everything matters. Everything you do, everything you say, everything you see can have an effect on how the world, characters, and story changes around you. Dialogue choices in the discussion can vary wildly just based off of other events that have already gone by previously. You'll think that the game forgot about a specific dialogue choice you made, and then hours down the line, the game will bring it back up, almost to haunt you. You'll see characters in the beginning of Act 1 that seem so unimportant that later on will play such a bigger role in your story. Heck, even wearing a simple necklace might make your companion disapprove of your taste, and they'll like you less for it. And that's important, because your friends in this game are important. Speaking of friends, Baldur's Gate 3 is a game you can play either solo or co-op with up to 3 other friends. And now, I've done both. I haven't played the game to completion yet, but I've already spent over 160 hours in the game across 3 different simultaneous playthroughs. One of these is a solo playthrough, another is a co-op playthrough with my wife, and a third is a co-op with a group of friends. I can confidently say that playing either solo or co-op with friends is amazing. In fact, both are so good that I would highly recommend doing both if you have the time. And I don't think that's something I've ever recommended before for any other game that I've ever played. And there's a reason why a lot of my friends on my Steam friends list have both a co-op campaign with friends and a simultaneous solo campaign. The game is just so rich and so dense that it's impossible to experience everything in a single playthrough. And trust me, you want to experience as much as you can because it's all so good. A good example of this is, while playing with friends is always a blast, Larian Studios has created a cast of companion characters that are so human that you can't help but want them in your party as well. You'll start a solo campaign just so that you can see more of their stories, because just like your human friends, they have their own wants, desires, their own baggage, and their own dreams. You'll fight for these individuals not because they offer you gold or other rewards, but because they're your friends. And after spending time with each of them, all you'll want to do is to help them find peace and happiness in the world. Now, before we finish up this video, I want to play a short clip from an interview with Swen Vincke, the founder and CEO of Larian Studios. The link to this interview is in the description box below, and if you have time, I highly recommend watching the full thing, but if you don't, I want you to at least hear this one quote from Swen.
Time to time, but we have people that look at it, but I try to not do it because otherwise it will influence the creative decisions. And I want to make sure that we keep on investing heavily in things that maybe 0.001% of the audience will see, because it is important that any journey that you take in your game is going to be equally rewarding. And if you would say, oh, 80% of the players go there and they see that, then what's going to happen is that you're going to put all your effort on the 80% experience and you're not going to do anything or less on the 20%. And that's not what you should do when you make a game like this, at least in IMHO. So
now, a lot of studios out there may say that they want to create unique experiences for players, but if I'm being honest, it doesn't often feel like most games can hit that mark or even come close to it. But when Swen Vincke says it here, I believe him, and here's why. While I was playing Baldur's Gate 3, there was an evil bastard that gets revealed in the game, and shortly after you see this individual, there's a cutscene that plays where they execute someone. I didn't even know who the executed character was, as I've never seen them before, but I was so upset by this execution that I reloaded my save and shot an arrow at this villain before his cutscene started, just so that I could hopefully start combat and save the NPC from getting executed. In a lot of games, you would be forced to see this NPC die, or even if you succeeded in being able to interrupt this cutscene, the game might just bug out afterwards because the cutscene was supposed to play and the NPC was supposed to die. But in Baldur's Gate 3, I saved an innocent life because I shot an arrow seconds before his cutscene introduction was able to play. That was my choice. I didn't care about a cool cinematic villain introduction. I just wanted to save someone, and the game let me do that. Swen Vincke and his team at Larian Studios made me feel like I was the 0.001% when they allowed me the freedom to take that shot. And in that moment, I felt more like a hero than I did in any quest in any game that I've played in recent memory. It was a moment that I had created, and just like many more in this game, it helped create an experience that was wholly my own. And this was just one moment in a game of hundreds of these moments. All just like this. Moments that I had a hand in. Moments that helped shape the game to not just a story, but my story. If that doesn't make Baldur's Gate 3 special, I don't know what does.